Have you ever felt that prickling sensation on the back of your neck when someone who's supposed to love you is actively working to undermine everything you've built? I never expected my own home to become a battlefield, but when my mother-in-law showed up with 2 suitcases and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, my life changed forever. She thought she held all the cards when she changed the locks and threw my belongings onto the front lawn. What she didn't know was that my name, and only my name, was on that property deed, and I was done being the perfect daughter-in-law. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first warning sign came in the form of daffodils. I'd spent the entire weekend planting 3 dozen bulbs along our walkway, imagining how they would brighten our home's entrance the following spring. When I returned from work on Monday, they had vanished, replaced by ceramic gnomes that Diane, my mother-in-law, had ordered online. "I've always had a good eye for curb appeal," she'd said when I stood speechless at the entrance of my own home. "Those yellow flowers would have clashed with the house color. I should have recognized the territorial marking for what it was. But back then, I still believed we could coexist peacefully." My husband Mark and I had been living in our Mapleton home for just over a year when his parents arrived for what was supposed to be a 2-week visit. Thomas, my father-in-law, had retired early due to health issues, and Diane insisted they needed a change of scenery. 2 weeks somehow stretched into a month, and then Mark delivered the news that would set everything in motion. "Mom and Dad are having financial troubles," he'd whispered one night as we lay in bed, the ceiling fan spinning lazily above us. "They had to sell their house, and they need a place to stay until they figure things out." I remember the weight that settled in my stomach. "How long are we talking about, Mark?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm not sure. 6 months, maybe. We have the space, Em." We did have the space, a 4-bedroom craftsman-style home that I'd fallen in love with the moment I saw it. I had grown up in cramped apartments, shuffled between relatives after my parents' messy divorce. This house represented stability, something permanent and mine. But I loved Mark, and his worried expression tugged at my heart. "Okay," I agreed, "but we need some ground rules." Diane and Thomas moved in the following weekend. I cleared out the guest bedroom and the small den that I'd been using as a home office for my remote marketing job. I typed up a list of house rules, nothing outrageous, just basics about privacy, noise levels, and kitchen use, and posted it on the refrigerator. Diane tore it down before dinner. "We're family, Emily, not tenants," she'd said, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. "We don't need rules to tell us how to behave in our son's home." I caught the phrasing, "our son's home," but let it slide. Mark was at work, and I didn't want my first day with his parents to devolve into an argument. Besides, Thomas seemed embarrassed by the whole situation, giving me apologetic smiles when Diane wasn't looking. The first month wasn't terrible. Diane took over most of the cooking, which was fine since I worked long hours. Thomas spent his days watching television or reading in the guest room. But as the weather turned colder and autumn leaves began to fall, the dynamic shifted. Diane started rearranging furniture while I was at work. She replaced my family photos with her own. She criticized my cleaning, my cooking, even how I folded Mark's laundry. "Mark has always preferred his shirts folded this way," she would say, undoing my work. "I've known what he likes for 32 years. She was marking her territory, one family photo and rearranged drawer at a time. When I brought these concerns to Mark, he seemed distracted, stressed about a big project at his engineering firm. "Can you just try to get along with her?" he'd asked, rubbing his temples. "She's going through a lot right now." So I tried. I bit my tongue when she accidentally deleted recordings from our DVR. I said nothing when she redecorated our living room with her own knickknacks. I retreated to my makeshift workspace in a corner of our bedroom, where I took client calls and developed marketing campaigns while trying to ignore the growing sensation that I was being erased from my own home, until the day I came home to find my grandmother's antique writing desk, my most precious possession, missing from the entryway. In its place stood an ornate console table I'd never seen before. "Where's my desk?" I demanded, finding Diane in the kitchen preparing dinner. She barely looked up from the pot she was stirring. "That old thing? It was taking up too much space. I put it in the garage for now. This table fits the space much better, don't you think?" Something in me snapped. "No, I don't think. That desk was my grandmother's. You had no right to move it." Diane set down her wooden spoon, turning to face me with an expression of practiced hurt. "I'm just trying to help make this house a proper home. Mark always loved the decor in our house growing up." "This is my home," I said, my voice shaking. "And I want my desk back where it belongs." Diane's expression hardened. "Well, technically this is Mark's house too, and he's always trusted my taste." I stormed out to the garage, finding my precious desk shoved in a corner behind boxes of Christmas decorations. It took all my strength, but I dragged it back inside and returned it to its rightful place. When Mark came home that night, he found his mother in tears and me seething with anger. "She's impossible," Diane sobbed. "I was just trying to help, make the house nicer." "By touching my things without permission?" I countered. Mark looked between us, his expression pained. "Emily, it's just furniture." "And Mom, maybe ask next time before moving things around." His weak attempt at mediation satisfied neither of us. Later that night, after another tense meal where Diane recounted stories of Mark's childhood while pointedly excluding me from the conversation, I confronted my husband in our bedroom. "This isn't working," I told him. "They've been here 3 months already with no sign of leaving, and your mother is systematically trying to erase me from our home." "You're overreacting," Mark said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "She's just trying to help." "No, she's not helping. She's taking over. Have you noticed that all of my things are disappearing while your mother's stuff is everywhere? This doesn't feel like my house anymore." Mark sighed, pulling me into a reluctant embrace. "It's just temporary, Em. They're family. We can't turn them away." I pulled back, searching his face. "And what am I?" "You're my wife, and I love you. But they need us right now." I wondered when us had become Mark and his parents, instead of Mark and Emily. I wondered when I had become a guest in my own home. The situation continued to deteriorate. Diane began intercepting my mail, claiming she was organizing it. She answered my cell phone when I left it on the charger. She commented on my work calls, suggesting I was too assertive with clients. Every boundary I tried to establish, she trampled with impunity. Thomas, to his credit, seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his wife's behavior. One afternoon, he found me on the back porch, wiping away frustrated tears after Diane had reorganized my workspace. "I'm sorry about all this," he said quietly, lowering himself into the chair beside me. "Diane has always been territorial. Losing our house hit her hard." I looked at him, really looked at him for perhaps the first time. His shoulders drooped with the weight of unspoken burdens. "What exactly happened with your house, Thomas?" He hesitated, then sighed deeply. "Bad investments. I trusted the wrong people. We had to sell quickly to cover debts." Something in his tone made me wonder if there was more to the story, but I didn't press. Instead, I asked, "Have you and Diane discussed your next steps? This arrangement was supposed to be temporary." Thomas's gaze drifted to the autumn leaves swirling across our backyard. "Diane seems quite comfortable here. I'm not sure she's planning to leave anytime soon." His words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the October breeze. The following week, I connected with my friend Jessica at Morning Brew, our local coffee shop. Jessica had known me since college, and unlike Mark, she saw through my everything's fine facade immediately. "You look like hell," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. Thanks. I feel worse, I replied, wrapping my hands around my mug of chai. I told her everything about Diane's escalating behavior, Mark's passivity, and my growing fear that I was losing my home inch by inch. Jessica listened without interruption, her expression darkening. "This is emotional abuse, Em," she said when I finished. "She's trying to push you out." "But why? I've never done anything to her." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Haven't you? You married her son." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You gave him a life separate from her, and now you own a beautiful home that she's clearly jealous of. I shook my head. We own it. Mark and I. A strange expression crossed Jessica's face. Do you? Both of you? Of course, I responded automatically, but something niggled at the back of my mind. When we'd purchased the house, Mark had been in the middle of clearing up an old credit issue. My credit score was excellent, so we'd decided. "Oh my God," I whispered. "What?" Jessica leaned forward. "The house. It's in my name. Just mine." We were going to add Mark later, but with everything that happened after we moved in, Jessica's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" I nodded slowly, the realization dawning. The deed is in my name only. I remember signing all the paperwork by myself because Mark was away on business when our closing date got moved up unexpectedly. A slow smile spread across Jessica's face. Well, that changes things, doesn't it? For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. But it was quickly doused by reality. It doesn't matter. Mark would never side with me over his mother. "Are you sure about that?" Jessica asked. "Have you really stood your ground, Emily? Or have you been tiptoeing around trying to keep the peace?" Her words stung because they were true. I had been accommodating, compromising, retreating, all to avoid conflict, all to be the good wife and daughter-in-law. "What would you do?" I asked. Jessica took a sip of her coffee, then leveled her gaze at me. "I'd stop playing nice. This is your house, Emily. Time to act like it." As I drove home, Jessica's words echoed in my mind. My house. My rules. The thought was empowering, but terrifying. Confronting Diane meant possibly losing Mark. Was I prepared for that? The decision was made for me when I arrived home to find Diane hosting a garden club meeting in our living room. 10 women I'd never met sat among my furniture, drinking from my wedding china, while Diane played the perfect hostess. "Oh, Emily, there you are," she called when she spotted me frozen in the doorway. "Ladies, this is my daughter-in-law. She works so much we hardly see her. Emily, I'm giving the ladies a tour of the house renovations I'm planning." "Renovations?" I repeated dumbly. "Yes, dear. I've been telling them how we're finally going to update this outdated kitchen. Those countertops have got to go." I looked around at the strangers in my living room, at my mother-in-law planning changes to my house without my knowledge or consent, and something inside me hardened. Without a word, I turned and walked out, ignoring Diane's calls behind me. I drove to the county records office, requested a copy of my property deed, and confirmed what I already knew. Emily Wilson was the sole owner of 415 Maple Street. Not Mark Wilson. Not Diane and Thomas Wilson. Just me. Armed with this knowledge and a newfound determination, I returned home to find the garden club gone and Diane flipping through kitchen renovation magazines at my dining table. "We need to talk," I said, setting the property records down in front of her. Diane glanced at the papers, then up at me with a dismissive smile. "Can it wait, dear? I'm rather busy planning." "No, it can't wait, and you're not planning anything. For this house." She sighed dramatically. "Emily, I'm only trying to help increase your property value. These old countertops are exactly how I want them," I cut in. "This is my house, Diane. Mine. Not yours, not Mark's. Mine." She blinked, finally registering my tone. What are you talking about? This is my son's home. I tapped the deed. No, it's not. The house is in my name only. Check for yourself. Diane snatched up the papers, her eyes widening as she scanned the document. When she looked up, her pleasant mask had slipped, revealing the anger beneath. This must be a mistake. It's not. And starting today, things are going to change around here. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair backward. How dare you speak to me this way? After everything I've done, Mark will hear about this. Good, I said, standing my ground. I look forward to that conversation. As Diane stormed off to call Mark, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The confrontation I'd been dreading had begun, and I was still standing. Whatever came next, I would face it with the knowledge that this was my home, and I was done being a guest in it. The wait for Mark to come home that evening was excruciating. I paced our bedroom, the last space in the house that still felt somewhat mine, rehearsing what I would say. Diane had barricaded herself in the guest room after our confrontation, emerging only to whisper urgently with Thomas in the kitchen. I caught fragments of their conversation. Ungrateful. Temporary. Setback, Mark will fix this. When I heard Mark's car in the driveway, my heart began to race. This was it. The moment of truth. Would he stand with me, or would his mother's influence prove too strong? I heard the murmur of voices downstairs, Diane's high-pitched tone carrying urgency. After what felt like an eternity, heavy footsteps ascended the stairs. Our bedroom door opened, and Mark stood there, his expression unreadable. Is it true? He asked without preamble. The house is only in your name? I nodded, straightening my shoulders. Yes. We never got around to adding you to the deed after your credit issues were resolved. Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times when he was stressed. Mom's pretty upset. I imagine she is, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. She just discovered she can't take over a house that doesn't belong to her. That's harsh, Emily. She's just trying to help. I felt a flash of anger. Is that what you call it? Helping? She's been systematically pushing me out of my own home for months, and you've done nothing to stop it. Mark looked taken aback. That's not fair. She's my mother, and they're going through a hard time. And I'm your wife, I exclaimed, my composure finally cracking. But you haven't been acting like it. Every time she crosses a line, you make excuses for her. Every time I tell you I'm unhappy, you dismiss my feelings. That's not true, he protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. It is true, I insisted. And now we're going to have an honest conversation about boundaries and respect, because I can't live like this anymore. Mark sank onto the edge of our bed, suddenly looking exhausted. What do you want me to do, Emily? Kick my parents out? They have nowhere to go. I want you to stand up for me, I said, sitting beside him. I want you to acknowledge that what your mother has been doing isn't okay. And yes, eventually I want them to find their own place. It's not that simple, he muttered. Why not? They sold their house. They must have money from that sale. Mark's silence spoke volumes. I studied his face, noting the tightness around his jaw, the way he refused to meet my eyes. Mark, I said, slowly, where did the money from your parents' house go? He sighed heavily. Dad made some bad investments, lost almost everything. What little they got from the house sale went to paying off debts. So your plan was, what? Let them live with us forever? Not forever, he said quickly. Just until they get back on their feet. And when will that be? Your father is retired with health issues, and your mother hasn't worked in 20 years. How exactly are they getting back on their feet? Mark had no answer for that. We sat in heavy silence for several minutes before he spoke again. I didn't know Mom was being so territorial. Why didn't you tell me how bad it was getting? I gave him an incredulous look. I've been telling you for months. You just haven't been listening. Our conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock. The door opened before either of us could respond, and Diane stood there, her face tight with barely contained fury. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her saccharine tone at odds with her expression. "But I think we need to clear the air as a family." Mark stood. "Mom, now's not a good time." "On the contrary," she replied, stepping into our bedroom uninvited. "It's the perfect time to address this misunderstanding." I rose to my feet as well, determined not to be literally or figuratively looked down upon. "This isn't a misunderstanding. Diane, the house is in my name. That's a fact, not an opinion." "A technicality," she dismissed with a wave of her hand. "One that I'm sure Mark will rectify immediately." We both looked at Mark, who shifted uncomfortably between us. "Mom, Emily and I need to discuss this privately." "What's there to discuss?" Diane demanded. "This is your home too, Samuel. You can't let her hold that over your head." Samuel. She'd called him by his full first name, something I'd only heard her do when emotionally manipulating him. I watched my husband's face, saw the conflict there, and made a decision. "Mark," I said quietly, "I love you, but I can't continue living like this. Your mother has been systematically trying to push me out of my own home, and you've been letting her." "That's absurd," Diane interjected. I ignored her, keeping my eyes on Mark. "I'm not asking you to choose between your mother and me. I'm asking you to choose what's right, to stand up for our marriage and our home." Mark looked torn, glancing between his mother and me. In that moment of hesitation, I saw everything I needed to know. "I'll be staying at Jessica's tonight," I said, reaching for my overnight bag. "Take some time to think about what you really want, Mark." "Emily, wait," he began, but I was already moving past him, past Diane, who stood like a sentinel in our doorway. "You can't just leave," she called after me. "We need to resolve this." I paused at the top of the stairs, turning back to face them both. "You're right. We do need to resolve this. But not tonight, and not with you dictating the terms, Diane. This is my house. I decide what happens here." The look on her face was almost worth the heartache of walking out my front door, not knowing if I'd ever feel welcome there again. Jessica welcomed me with open arms and a bottle of wine. As we sat in her cozy living room above the garage, I poured out everything that had happened. "I'm proud of you," she said when I finished. Standing up to Diane was long overdue. "But what if I've lost Mark in the process?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Jessica refilled our glasses. "If Mark chooses his mother over your marriage, then I'm sorry. But he's not the partner you deserve." I spent a restless night on Jessica's pull-out couch, checking my phone every few minutes. Mark sent several messages, ranging from confused to angry to pleading, but I stood firm. We needed this break, this line in the sand, to have any chance of moving forward. The next morning, I called into work, requesting a few personal days. Then, steeling myself, I drove back to my house to collect more of my things. I half expected the locks to be changed, a petty move that would align with Diane's character, but my key still worked. The house was eerily quiet when I entered. I moved quickly to our bedroom, pulling a suitcase from the closet and filling it with clothes and essentials. As I was zipping it closed, Thomas appeared in the doorway. "Emily," he said softly, "do you have a minute?" I hesitated, then nodded. Unlike Diane, Thomas had never been unkind to me, just passive in the face of his wife's behavior. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I want to apologize for everything. She's always been controlling, but it's gotten worse since we lost our home." "I understand this has been difficult for you both," I said cautiously. "But that doesn't excuse how she's treated me." Thomas nodded, looking ashamed. "I know. And I should have said something sooner." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "There's something you should know about our financial situation." I sat on the edge of the bed, gesturing for him to continue. It wasn't just bad investments that cost us our home, he admitted. Diane has a problem with spending, shopping. She maxed out credit cards I didn't even know we had. By the time I discovered how bad it was, we were drowning in debt. This revelation didn't entirely surprise me given Diane's materialistic tendencies, but the extent of it was shocking. Does Mark know? Thomas shook his head. Diane made me promise not to tell him. She's always been so proud, so concerned with appearances. She couldn't bear for him to know the truth. So instead, you moved in here and let her take over our home? He winced. I know how it looks. I've enabled her for years, making excuses, covering for her. I'm not proud of it. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because you deserve the truth. And because... He hesitated, lowering his voice. I think Diane is planning something. She was on the phone with her sister all morning, talking about legal options, about contesting the house ownership. A chill ran through me. She can't do that. The deed is in my name. I know, but Diane sees what she wants to see. And right now, she sees this house as her son's rightful property, and by extension, hers. I stood, grabbing my suitcase. Thank you for telling me, Thomas. I appreciate the warning. As I headed for the door, he called after me. Emily? For what it's worth, I think Mark is starting to see things more clearly. After you left last night, he and Diane had quite an argument. I paused, hope flickering. Really? Thomas nodded. It's the first time I've seen him stand up to her in years. With those words giving me strength, I continued downstairs. As I reached the front door, it opened, and Mark stood there looking startled to see me. Emily, he breathed, you came back. Just to get some things, I clarified. I'm staying at Jessica's for now. His face fell. Can we talk, please? I hesitated, then nodded. But not here. Meet me at Morning Brew in an hour. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Diane watching from the living room window, her expression calculating. Thomas's warning echoed in my mind. Whatever she was planning, I needed to be prepared. An hour later, I sat across from Mark in our usual booth at the coffee shop, 2 untouched mugs between us. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. I'm sorry, he began. For everything. For not seeing what was happening. For not standing up for you. You were right. I've been letting my mother cross boundaries that should never have been crossed. It was everything I'd wanted to hear for months, but now that the words were finally coming, I found myself wary. What changed? Mark sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. After you left, Mom went on a rant about how ungrateful you are, how you've been trying to turn me against her, and suddenly I could see it, really see it. How she's always manipulated situations, twisted things to make herself the victim. I've been doing it my whole life, appeasing her to keep the peace. And now? I asked, my heart pounding. Now I want to fix this, fix us, if you'll give me the chance. I wanted to believe him, wanted it desperately, but months of disappointment had taught me caution. Words are easy, Mark. What about your parents? They're still in our house. I talked to Dad this morning, he said. They're going to look for an apartment, something small but close by. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. And your mother agreed to this? Mark looked down at his coffee. Not exactly. She still thinks we can work things out if we all just compromise. Compromise, I repeated flatly. Like I've been doing for months while she systematically took over our home? I know, he said quickly. And I'm not asking you to keep doing that. I'm asking for a chance to make things right. I studied his face, searching for any sign of the wavering, people-pleasing husband who had consistently chosen his mother's comfort over mine. Instead, I saw determination and regret in equal measure. I need to know you're really on my side this time, I said finally. That when things get difficult, and they will, you won't cave to her demands. Mark reached across the table, taking my hand in his. I'm on your side, Emily. Always. I just lost sight of that for a while. I wanted to believe him. More than anything, I wanted to believe that our marriage could survive this storm. But Thomas's warning still echoed in my mind. There's something else you should know, I said, squeezing his hand. Your father told me about your mother's spending problem, about how it contributed to them losing their house. Mark's expression shifted from surprise to realization to anger. That explains a lot, actually. Why they were always borrowing money. Why Dad seemed so stressed about finances even before they sold the house. Your mother's planning something, I continued. Your dad overheard her talking about legal options, about contesting the house ownership. Mark's face hardened. She can't do that. The house is yours. The simple acknowledgement, spoken without hesitation, lifted a weight from my shoulders. So you understand why I had to draw a line? Why I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine? I do, he said firmly. And I'm going to fix this, Emily. I promise. As we left the coffee shop together, I felt cautiously optimistic. Mark seemed genuinely committed to standing up to his mother and protecting our marriage. But I'd been disappointed before, and Diane had proven herself a formidable opponent. The real test would come when we returned home to find out exactly what she had been planning in my absence. The house was quiet when we arrived. Too quiet. Mark's hand was warm and reassuring on my lower back as we entered, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into an ambush. The living room was empty, the kitchen deserted. Mark frowned, checking his watch. They should be here, he murmured. Dad's car's in the driveway. We found them in the home office, my home office, that had been commandeered by Thomas months ago. Diane sat behind my desk like she owned it, papers spread before her. Thomas stood by the window, his expression grave. And beside them sat a woman I'd never seen before, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. What's going on? Mark demanded, taking in the scene. Diane's smile was triumphant. Mark, Emily, this is Patricia Lambert. She's a family attorney. My blood ran cold, so this was her plan. Legal action. The attorney stood, offering her hand. Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Wilson, I understand there's some confusion about the property ownership that we need to clarify. I didn't take her hand. There's no confusion. The house is in my name. Patricia smiled thinly. Yes, well, that's the technical situation. However, Mrs. Wilson, the elder Mrs. Wilson, has raised some concerns about the circumstances under which the property was purchased. Mark stepped forward. Mom, what are you doing? Diane's expression was a perfect blend of concern and righteousness. What's necessary, dear? This house was meant to be your family home. Emily's actions have made it clear that she doesn't consider us family. Because family doesn't try to take over someone else's home, I retorted, anger building. Family doesn't rearrange furniture, replace photos, and plan renovations without permission. Patricia cleared her throat. If we could focus on the legal matter at hand. There is no legal matter, Mark interrupted. The house is in Emily's name. End of story. Patricia looked uncomfortable. Actually, there may be grounds for what we call constructive trust. If funds for the purchase came from joint accounts, or if there was a clear understanding that the property would be jointly owned. Stop. Thomas's quiet command silenced the room. He turned from the window, his expression pained but resolute. This has gone far enough. Diane stared at her husband in shock. Thomas, what are you doing? The right thing. Finally. He looked at Mark, then at me. Emily, I'm sorry. For everything. For letting Diane's behavior go unchecked. for not speaking up sooner. He turned to the attorney. There are no grounds for any legal action. My wife is upset because she's lost control of the situation. Thomas, Diane gasped. He continued as if she hadn't spoken. The house was purchased with Emily's funds. She had excellent credit while Mark was still clearing up an old issue. They planned to add his name later but never got around to it. There was no deception, no constructive trust scenario. The attorney shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Wilson, you assured me there were financial irregularities. The only financial irregularities, Thomas cut in, are the ones that cost us our own home. Diane's spending habits, not Emily's actions, are what brought us here. Mark looked between his parents, realization dawning. Is that true? Is that why you had to sell your house? Diane's face crumpled, her carefully maintained facade finally breaking. You don't understand, she whispered. I just wanted control, I finished for her. Over your surroundings, over your son, over me. The attorney gathered her papers quickly. I believe I've been misled about the situation. I'll see myself out. As she left, the room fell into tense silence. Diane sat frozen behind the desk, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Thomas moved to stand beside her, a supportive hand on her shoulder despite everything. Mark took a deep breath. Mom, Dad, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what happens next. For the next hour, we laid everything bare. Diane's spending addiction, Thomas's enabling behavior, Mark's lifelong pattern of appeasing his mother, my resentment at being systematically erased from my own home. There were tears, angry words, moments when I thought the fractures might be too deep to repair. But slowly, painfully, we began to find a path forward. Diane agreed to seek therapy for her spending and control issues. Thomas promised to stop, enabling her destructive behaviors. Mark vowed to prioritize our marriage and establish healthy boundaries with his parents. And I made a commitment to be more direct about my feelings rather than suffering in silence until I reached a breaking point. By the time we finished talking, the afternoon had faded into evening. We were exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if the truth, however painful, had cleared the air of toxic secrets. We'll start looking for a place tomorrow, Thomas said firmly, despite Diane's look of dismay. Something small but manageable, no more imposing on you two. Mark squeezed my hand. And we'll help you get settled. The right way, with healthy boundaries. As Thomas led a subdued Diane upstairs to begin packing, Mark turned to me. I'm so sorry, Emily. For all of it. I leaned against him, emotionally drained but hopeful. We have a lot to work on. That night I slept in my own bed for the first time in days, acutely aware of the subtle shifts in our household dynamics. Mark held me close, his breathing eventually steadying into sleep, but my mind continued to race. Victory felt hollow somehow, tainted by the knowledge that family relationships had been irreparably damaged. I wondered if there was a way to maintain boundaries while still preserving some semblance of connection between Mark and his parents. Morning arrived with the strange, muffled sounds of Diane and Thomas packing. I made coffee and steeled myself before heading to the guest room, 2 mugs in hand. I knocked softly, waiting until Thomas called for me to enter. The room that had been theirs for months was now in disarray, suitcases open on the bed, drawers emptied onto chairs. Coffee? I offered, holding out the mugs. Thomas accepted his with a grateful nod. Diane hesitated before taking hers, not quite meeting my eyes. Thank you, she said stiffly. I leaned against the doorframe, searching for words that wouldn't sound triumphant or condescending. I found some apartment listings online. There's a nice senior community about 15 minutes from here. 2-bedroom units with a clubhouse and activities. I pulled the printouts from my pocket, offering them to Thomas. Diane stiffened. Senior community? We're not invalids. I know that, I said, keeping my voice even. But they have social events. A fitness center. People your age to connect with. It might be nice. Thomas skimmed the listings. These actually look quite reasonable. Thank you, Emily. Our tentative peace was interrupted by the doorbell. Mark called up that he would get it, and I excused myself to join him. To my surprise, Jessica stood on our doorstep, a large tote bag in hand. Thought you might need reinforcements, she said, stepping inside and giving me a quick hug. How's Operation Take Back Your House going? I glanced nervously toward the stairs. It's progressing. They're packing. Jessica raised her eyebrows. Well, that's something. And Mark? Her voice dropped to a whisper. He finally stood up to Diane, I confirmed. We're working through things. Good. She handed me the tote bag. I brought breakfast. Real estate attorney by day, stress baker by night. I peered inside to find homemade muffins and scones. You're a lifesaver. Join us? Jessica followed me to the kitchen where Mark was brewing a second pot of coffee. He greeted her with obvious relief. Thanks for taking care of Emily these past few days. Someone had to, Jessica replied, her tone light but pointed. Mark had the grace to look ashamed. I know. I've been a terrible husband. Not terrible, I corrected, setting out plates. Just conflict avoidant to a fault. A trait I'm working on, he promised, pouring coffee for Jessica. We were arranging breakfast on the table when Thomas and Diane appeared in the doorway, suitcases in hand. Diane glanced at Jessica, then at the breakfast spread, her expression unreadable. We should get going, Thomas said. My brother's expecting us by noon. I felt a pang of guilt at their hasty departure. Despite everything, kicking them out had never been my goal. I'd simply wanted respect and boundaries. You could stay. For breakfast, I offered. Diane looked surprised. You'd want that? You're still Mark's parents, I said. That hasn't changed. A cautious truce settled over the breakfast table as we ate Jessica's baked goods and discussed practical matters. How long they might stay with Thomas's brother, which apartment listings looked promising, when they might come by to collect the rest of their belongings. Diane remained largely silent, contributing only when directly addressed. The fight seemed to have gone out of her, leaving behind a deflated shell of the domineering woman who had terrorized my home for months. After breakfast, we helped them load their suitcases into their car. As Thomas closed the trunk, he pulled Mark aside for a private word. Diane stood awkwardly by the passenger door, fidgeting with her purse strap. I hope you find a nice place, I said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. She nodded stiffly. I'm sure we will. I searched for something else to say, some way to ease the tension without surrendering the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. Maybe once you're settled, you and Thomas could come for dinner. Not to stay, just to visit. Diane's eyes widened slightly. You'd want that? After everything? You're Mark's family, I said simply. I'm not trying to cut you out of our lives. I just need this to be our home. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite acceptance, but perhaps understanding. I suppose I've been difficult. Coming from Diane, this qualified as a monumental admission. We all have things to work on, I acknowledged, offering an olive branch. Thomas and Mark rejoined us, and final goodbyes were exchanged. As their car pulled away, Mark slipped his arm around my waist. You okay? I leaned into him. Emotions conflicted. Ask me tomorrow or next week. I think I need time to process everything. Jessica, who had been watching from the porch, came down to join us. Well, that was surprisingly civilized. I was expecting broken dishes at minimum. The day's still young, I joked weakly. They could still come back with a battering ram. Mark squeezed my shoulder. Dad seemed genuinely remorseful. Mom? Well, she's got a long way to go. But this is a start. Back inside, the house felt Different, emptier, but in a good way. I wandered from room to room, mentally reclaiming spaces that had been overtaken. The guest room would need airing out. My office would need to be completely reorganized. But these were small tasks compared to the emotional work that lay ahead. Jessica stayed until mid-afternoon, helping me restore some order and providing a welcome buffer as Mark and I navigated our new reality. When she finally left, promising to check in tomorrow, Mark and I found ourselves truly alone in our home for the first time in months. "Where do we go from here?" he asked as we stood in the living room, surveying the subtle changes Diane had made over time. Picture frames moved, furniture slightly rearranged, decorative items I didn't recognize interspersed with my own. "First, we reclaim our space," I said, moving a crystal vase I'd never purchased to a side table. "Then we work on reclaiming our marriage." Mark nodded solemnly. "I've let you down, Em. I know that. But I promise you, things will be different. Going forward." I wanted to believe him, but caution tempered my optimism. "It's not just about your parents, Mark. It's about how easily you dismissed my feelings, how quickly you took her side over mine. Those patterns don't disappear overnight." "I know," he acknowledged. "I've got a lot of work to do. Maybe I should look into therapy, to understand why I've always been so eager to please her, why I couldn't stand up to her until now." His suggestion surprised me. Mark had always been resistant to the idea of counseling. That might be good, for both of us actually, individually and together. We spent the rest of the day slowly reclaiming our home. I moved my grandmother's desk back to its place of honor in the entryway. Mark helped me restore my office, carrying in my computer and files from where I'd stashed them in our bedroom. We ordered takeout for dinner and ate on the back porch, watching the sunset and talking more openly than we had in months. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since the conflict had escalated. The next morning brought new energy and new challenges. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor from across the street. "Emily, dear, I just wanted to check that everything's all right at your house," she said without preamble. "Yes, everything's fine," I replied, confused. "Why do you ask?" "Well, I saw your mother-in-law outside your house again this morning. She seemed to be trying to look through the windows. I thought it was odd, given that her car wasn't in the driveway." My blood ran cold. "What time was this?" "Around 7:30. Dear, Mark had just left for work. I was out getting my newspaper." I thanked her and hung up, mind racing. Mark had indeed left early for a meeting, and I'd been in the shower at 7:30. Had Diane come back to spy on us? To retrieve something she'd forgotten? Or was something more concerning happening? I did a quick check of the house, but found nothing obviously missing or disturbed. Still unsettled, I called Thomas's brother, whose number Mark had programmed into my phone, just in case. "Hello," a gruff voice answered. "Hi, Alan. This is Emily, Mark's wife. Sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if Diane and Thomas are there." There was a pause. "Thomas is. Diane left early this morning to run some errands. Said something about needing to get her medications transferred to a local pharmacy." "I see," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "If you see her, would you mind having her call me? There are a few questions about some kitchen items I wanted to ask her." After hanging up, I called Mark, who was equally concerned by the news that his mother had been peering through our windows. "I'll try calling her," he promised, "and I'll come home for lunch to check on you." I spent the morning on edge, jumping at every sound. I worked from home that day, my laptop set up at the kitchen table where I could see both the front door and the driveway. By lunchtime, Diane had neither called nor reappeared. Mark came home as promised, finding me tense but unharmed. "Dad says Mom's been acting strange since they arrived at Uncle Alan's," he reported, making us sandwiches. "Disappearing for hours, being vague about where she's going. He thinks she's just processing everything, but we know Diane doesn't give up easily, I finished for him. Mark nodded grimly. I'm worried about her mental state. Dad said she barely slept last night, kept talking about making things right. That doesn't sound ominous at all, I muttered. Mark had to return to work for an afternoon meeting, but promised to come straight home afterward. I continued working at the kitchen table, one eye always on the windows. Around 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to find Diane standing on my porch, arms folded tightly across her chest. I took a deep breath and opened the door, but only part way, my foot braced against the bottom. Diane, this is unexpected. She looked different, smaller somehow, without her usual perfect makeup and styled hair. Her eyes were rimmed with red, suggesting recent tears or lack of sleep. May I come in, just to talk? Every instinct warned against it, but refusing would only escalate tensions. 20 minutes, I said, stepping back to let her enter. Mark will be home soon. Diane walked stiffly into the living room, but remained standing, declining my automatic offer of tea or coffee. I need to say something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. I nodded cautiously, maintaining some distance between us. I've been unfair to you, she began, the words seeming to physically pain her. Thomas says I've been trying to take over your home, that I've been trying to push you out of Mark's life. She paused, and I fought the urge to fill the silence with platitudes. This was clearly difficult for her, and I wouldn't make it easier with empty reassurances. The thing is, she continued, Mark is all I have. All I've ever had, really. Thomas and our marriage hasn't been a true partnership in years. And when Mark met you, when he built this life that didn't include me at the center. She trailed off, blinking rapidly. You felt replaced, I supplied quietly. She nodded sharply. It was easy to paint you as the villain, the woman who stole my son. And when we lost our house, when we had to come here, I saw an opportunity to reclaim what I'd lost, to be needed again. Her honesty surprised me. I hadn't expected such self-awareness from a woman who had spent months manipulating everyone around her. I told myself I was helping, she continued, that the house needed a woman's touch, my touch, that Mark would appreciate the familiar comforts of his childhood home. But really, I was trying to erase you, to pretend you didn't exist, or that you were just temporary. And now? I asked when she fell silent. Diane met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time. Now I realize that I've risked losing my son entirely with my behavior. Thomas is furious with me. Mark is disappointed in me. And Her voice caught. I don't know how to fix it. The vulnerability in her admission disarmed me. This was a side of Diane I'd never seen, never imagined existed beneath the controlling exterior. It won't be fixed overnight, I said honestly. There's been too much damage. But acknowledging the problem is a start. She nodded, eyes downcast. I went to see a therapist this morning, just a consultation. Thomas insisted. That explained her earlier appearance at our house. She must have driven by on her way to or from the appointment. That's a positive step. She suggested I make amends, starting with you. Diane squared her shoulders. So I'm sorry, Emily, for trying to take over your home, for disrespecting your boundaries, for treating you like an obstacle instead of my son's chosen partner. Her apology sounded rehearsed but sincere. I wondered how many times she'd practiced it on the drive over. Thank you, I said simply. I appreciate that. Diane seemed to deflate slightly, as if she'd been bracing for rejection. There's something else about the house. My guard instantly went back up. What about it? I've been difficult about the ownership situation, she admitted. But I want you to know I've instructed Patricia, the attorney, not to pursue any action. The house is yours, as you said. I was wrong to suggest otherwise. Relief washed over me. I hadn't realized how much that particular threat had been weighing on my mind. That's good to hear. Diane glanced around the living room, her eyes lingering on the spaces where her decorative touches had been removed, replaced by my own style. It's a lovely home. You've created a beautiful space for Mark. For us, I corrected gently. Mark and I created it together. She flinched slightly but nodded. Yes, of course. An awkward silence settled between us. I wasn't ready to forgive completely, to act as if the months of manipulation hadn't happened. But I recognized the effort this visit required of her, the pride she'd had to swallow to apologize. Would you like that coffee now? I offered. Diane's surprise was evident. You don't want me to leave? You said you wanted to make amends, I replied. That's a process, not a single conversation. If we're going to find a way forward where you can be in Mark's life without trying to control it, we need to learn how to be in the same room without hostility. She considered this, then nodded slowly. Coffee would be nice. We moved to the kitchen, where I busied myself with the coffee maker while Diane perched uncomfortably on a stool at the counter. The silence was heavy but not entirely hostile. You know, I said as I measured coffee grounds, I never wanted to come between you and Mark. I know how important you are to him. Diane's hands fidgeted with a napkin. But I tried to come between you and him. Yes, I agreed, not softening. The truth. And it nearly destroyed our marriage. She winced. I never meant to hurt Mark. But you did, I pointed out. By forcing him to choose sides, by manipulating him, by refusing to respect his choices. You hurt him deeply. Tears welled in her eyes. How do I fix that? I placed a mug of coffee in front of her. By respecting his boundaries going forward. By treating his choices, including me, with respect. By getting help for your control issues so they don't keep damaging your relationships. She took a sip of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. The therapist said I have narcissistic tendencies, that I see people as extensions of myself rather than as independent beings. The clinical assessment fit perfectly with my experience of her, but I was surprised by her willingness to share it. And what did you think of that diagnosis? My first instinct was to dismiss it, she admitted. To find another therapist who would tell me what I wanted to hear. But then I thought about how close I've come to losing Mark, and she swallowed hard. I'm going back next week, and the week after. We were still talking, the conversation gradually becoming less strained. When Mark arrived home, he stopped short in the doorway, clearly shocked to find his mother and me sitting together at the kitchen counter without obvious signs of conflict. Mom, what are you doing here? Diane set down her coffee cup. Making amends. Or trying to. At least. Mark looked between us uncertainly. And, how's that going? It's a start, I said, offering him a reassuring smile. Your mom was just telling me about her therapy consultation this morning. His eyebrows shot up. Really? Diane nodded. It was illuminating and difficult, but I'm going back. Mark joined us at the counter, accepting the mug of coffee. I poured him. I'm proud of you, Mom. That's a big step. The three of us talked for another hour as afternoon faded into evening. Not about the conflict directly, but around it, about Diane and Thomas finding an apartment, about Mark's work stress, about neutral topics that allowed us to interact without triggering fresh wounds. By the time Diane announced she should get back to Alan's house, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to cautiously cordial. I walked her to the door, Mark following behind us. On the porch, Diane turned to face me. Thank you for listening, for giving me a chance to apologize. We have a long way to go, I reminded her. One conversation doesn't erase months of conflict. I know, she said softly. But it's a beginning. As we watched her drive away, Mark put his arm around my shoulders. You amaze me, you know that? After everything she put you through, you still sat and had coffee with her. I leaned into his embrace. I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it for us, for our future. Your parents will always be part of our lives in some way. We need to find a path forward that doesn't involve constant warfare. Or constant surrender, he added pointedly. I meant what I said about boundaries. Emily, things will be different now. I turned to face him, searching his eyes. Promise me something. If I ever start acting like your mother, controlling, manipulative, unwilling to respect others' boundaries, you'll call me on it immediately. Mark laughed. You couldn't be like her if you tried. Promise me anyway, I insisted. These patterns can be insidious. He sobered, nodding. I promise. And you'll do the same for me? Let me know if I start slipping back into old patterns of avoidance and appeasement. Deal, I agreed, sealing it with a kiss. That evening, as we cooked dinner, together in our reclaimed kitchen, I felt the first real stirrings of hope. The crisis wasn't over. Diane's apparent breakthrough could easily be another manipulation tactic, and rebuilding trust with Mark would take time. But for the first time, I could envision a future where my home truly felt like mine again, where my marriage was stronger for having weathered the storm. I was setting the table when my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Survived the day? Need rescue? I smiled and typed back. All quiet on the Western Front. Diane came by to apologize. Suspicious but hopeful. Her response was immediate. Whoa, plot twist. Keep your guard up, but good sign? Time will tell, I replied. Dinner tomorrow to debrief? Absolutely. Your house or mine? I paused, considering. For months, I'd avoided hosting anyone at our home, too embarrassed by the tension, too worn down by Diane's constant presence. Now, with the house emptied of in-laws and slowly returning to its former state, I felt a surge of possessive pride. My house, I texted firmly. 7 p.m. I'll cook. Mark looked up from the stove where he was stirring pasta sauce. Jessica coming? Over? Tomorrow night, I confirmed. I thought it would be nice to have a friend over. To reclaim our social life along with our space. He smiled warmly. I like that idea. Maybe we could have your brother and his wife over this weekend? It's been ages since we've seen them. The suggestion heartened me. Mark was thinking about our future, about rebuilding the life that had been put on hold during his parents' occupation. That sounds perfect. As we sat down to dinner in our dining room, the same room where I'd discovered the house was solely in my name, where so much conflict had played out, I felt a sense of peacefulness descend. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust had been broken, boundaries crossed, relationships damaged. But here, in this moment, sharing a meal with my husband in our home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The property deed that had sparked so much conflict now seemed like a symbol of something larger. My willingness to finally stand up for myself, to demand respect, to refuse to be erased from my own life. It had been a painful journey, but as I looked across the table at Mark, I knew it had been necessary. To new beginnings, I proposed, raising my wine glass. Mark clinked his glass against mine. And to hard-won wisdom. 2 weeks passed with surprising tranquility. Diane and Thomas found a modest apartment in Silvercrest, a seniors' community 15 minutes from our house. It wasn't the most luxurious, complex, but it offered activities, a community garden, and most importantly, independence. Mark and I helped them move in, carrying boxes and arranging furniture under Diane's careful direction. She remained subdued throughout the process, her usual commanding presence tempered by what appeared to be genuine effort to change. The bedroom lamp would look better by the window, I suggested at one point, testing the waters. Diane paused, visibly wrestling with the urge to dismiss my opinion. Perhaps you're right, she conceded, a small victory that didn't go unnoticed by Mark, who shot me an encouraging smile. Thomas seemed relieved by the change in dynamics. As we unpacked kitchenware, he confided that Diane had attended 3 therapy sessions already. It's not easy for her, he said quietly, accepting that her behavior drove everyone away. But she's trying. I arranged mugs in the cabinet, considering his words. Change takes time, we understand that. She was up all night reorganizing. These boxes, he continued, gesturing around the apartment, said she needed to make it perfect before you and Mark arrived. I think she wants to prove she can create her own space instead of taking over someone else's. The insight surprised me. Perhaps Diane's controlling nature came from a deeper insecurity, a desperate need to shape her surroundings when she felt powerless in other aspects of life. It didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me understand them a little better. After the move-in day, Mark and I established clear boundaries: Sunday dinners at our house or their apartment, phone calls limited to evenings unless it was an emergency. No unannounced visits. Diane struggled with these restrictions, accustomed as she was to unlimited access to her son, but she complied with minimal resistance. On our 3rd Sunday dinner at their apartment, as Mark helped Thomas set up a new television stand, Diane approached me in the kitchen. I've been thinking about taking a class, she said, arranging cookies on a plate with precise movements. The community center offers watercolor painting on Thursday afternoons. That sounds lovely, I replied, genuinely pleased by her interest in developing a hobby unrelated to micromanaging her family. Have you painted before? Not since college, she admitted. I used to enjoy it before Mark was born? I guessed. She nodded, a faraway look in her eyes. Before I became someone's mother, someone's wife, just Diane Baker, art student with big dreams. I'd never thought of her as having an identity separate from her role as Mark's mother. The realization that she'd once been a young woman with aspirations of her own humanized her in a way our previous interactions never had. You should definitely take the class, I encouraged. Maybe you could show me your work sometime. She looked surprised by my interest, but seemed pleased. I'd like that. As we drove home that evening, I shared the conversation with Mark. It's hard to imagine your mother as a college art student. He looked equally bemused. Dad mentioned once that she used to paint, but she always brushed it off when I asked about it, said it was just a silly phase. Maybe rediscovering that part of herself will help her find an identity beyond being your mother. Give her something else to focus on. Mark reached across the console to squeeze my hand. That would be good for everyone. Our cautious optimism was tested the following Saturday when Diane called in a panic. Thomas has fallen, she gasped, her voice shrill with fear. The ambulance is taking him to Mercy Hospital. Can you meet us there? We arrived at the emergency room to find Diane pacing the waiting area, her face pale with worry. He was hanging curtains, she explained as Mark enveloped her in a hug. The stepladder wasn't stable enough. He hit his head on the coffee table on the way down. The doctors diagnosed Thomas with a concussion and a sprained wrist. Nothing life-threatening, but concerning enough given his age and previous health issues. As we waited for him to be discharged, the nurse provided care instructions. He'll need someone with him for the next 48 hours, she explained, handing Diane a sheet of symptoms to watch for. And he shouldn't be alone on the stairs for at least a week. Diane nodded, her expression determined. I'll take care of him. We can help, Mark offered. One of us could stay with you, or Thomas could stay at our house while he recovers. I tensed involuntarily at the suggestion, memories of their previous temporary stay still fresh. Diane caught my reaction and, to my surprise, shook her head. That's very kind. but we'll manage at the apartment. I can handle it." She turned to me, something like understanding in her eyes. "You've both done enough. This is my responsibility." The mature response caught me off guard. I'd expected her to leap at the opportunity to reclaim space in our home, to use Thomas's injury as leverage. Instead, she was respecting our boundaries, accepting help only in the form of rides to follow up appointments and grocery deliveries. "Are you sure?" Mark pressed. "It's no trouble." "I'm sure," Diane said firmly. "You two have your own lives. Besides, Mrs. Calloway next door has already offered to check in regularly. The community has been very welcoming." On the drive home, Mark seemed troubled. "I feel like I should be doing more. He's my father." "Your mother specifically said they're okay," I reminded him. "That's growth on her part. She's respecting our space." He nodded, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "I know. It's just, I've spent my whole life trying to please her, anticipating her needs. It feels strange not to drop everything when she's in crisis." "You're still helping," I assured him. "Just with boundaries this time." Mark relaxed slightly. "You're right. This is healthier for everyone." The next week brought another test when Mark had to travel to San Diego for a 3-day conference. In the past, his absence would have been an open invitation for Diane to insert herself into my daily routine, offering unwanted company and unsolicited advice. Now, under our new arrangement, she called the evening before his departure. "I wanted to check if you need anything while Mark is away," she said stiffly, clearly working from a mental script. "Thomas is feeling better, and I thought perhaps I could drop off a casserole." Her awkward formality made me smile. "That's thoughtful of you, Diane. A casserole would be nice, but you don't need to go to any trouble." "It's no trouble," she insisted. "I've been experimenting with new recipes. Thomas can only eat so much." We arranged for her to drop off the food the following afternoon. When she arrived, I invited her in for coffee, more out of politeness than desire for her company. To my surprise, she declined. "I have my watercolor class in an hour," she explained. "Just wanted to deliver this while it's still warm." I accepted. The casserole dish, touched by the normalcy of the interaction. "How's the class going?" A hint of genuine enthusiasm brightened her face. "It's challenging. I'm quite rusty, but the instructor says I have a good eye for composition." "I'd love to see your work sometime," I said, meaning it. She hesitated, then reached into her purse and withdrew a small painting. "It's not very good," she warned as she handed it to me. "Just a practice piece." The watercolor depicted a simple garden scene, flowers in varying shades of purple and blue against a washed green background. It wasn't gallery-worthy, but it showed promise, with delicate brushwork and thoughtful use of color. "This is lovely, Diane," I said honestly. "You have talent." She flushed with pleasure. "You can keep it if you like, as a thank you for helping with Thomas's accident." The gesture took me by surprise. "Are you sure?" She nodded, already backing toward her car. "I should go. Don't want to be late for class." As she drove away, I looked down at the small painting in my hands. It was the first gift Diane had ever given me that wasn't loaded with ulterior motives or passive-aggressive commentary. Perhaps it was a small thing, but it felt significant. A peace offering, a tentative step toward a different kind of relationship. That evening, I called Jessica and invited her over for dinner, serving Diane's surprisingly delicious chicken and wild rice casserole alongside a salad of my own making. "Your mother-in-law made this?" Jessica asked incredulously after her first bite. "Without poison?" I laughed, showing her the watercolor Diane had given me. "She's changing, slowly but noticeably." Jessica examined the painting with interest. Not half bad, actually. And giving you art is a far cry from stealing your house." "It's a process," I acknowledged. There are still moments when I catch myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, expecting her to revert to her old controlling ways. But it's been almost a month, and she's respected every boundary we've set. People can change, Jessica mused. When they're properly motivated. She almost lost her son. That's pretty strong motivation. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe the therapy is actually helping her address the underlying issues. Jessica topped up our wine glasses. Speaking of progress, how are things with Mark? Has he maintained his shiny new backbone? I smiled at her blunt phrasing. He has, actually. He's been much more assertive with his mother, more attentive to my feelings. We've been seeing a couples therapist too, which has helped us communicate better. Look at you two, all grown up and working through your issues, Jessica teased. Next thing I know, you'll be hosting Thanksgiving dinner with the in-laws and actually enjoying it. Her joking comment sparked an idea. Thanksgiving was only a month away, traditionally celebrated at Diane and Thomas's house. Their former house, now sold. This would be their first holiday in the apartment, their first major family occasion since the conflict. Perhaps it was an opportunity to establish new traditions, to redefine our family dynamics on neutral ground. After Mark returned from his conference, I broached the subject over dinner. What do you think about hosting Thanksgiving this year? Your parents' apartment is too small for a proper gathering. He looked up from his plate, surprised. You want to have my parents here for Thanksgiving? After everything? I was thinking we could invite my brother and his wife, too. Make it a true family gathering, not just your side or mine. Mark considered this. That could be nice. But are you sure you're ready for that? Holidays can be stressful even without complicated family dynamics. His concern warmed me. The old Mark would have agreed immediately, eager to please his mother, regardless of my feelings. I think I am ready, I said. It would be a step forward, a way to create new memories in this house. Happy ones. Then let's do it, he decided, but with conditions. We plan the menu together, no letting Mom take over the kitchen. We set a clear start and end time. And if things get tense, we have an exit strategy. I smiled at his thoughtful approach. Deal. When we extended the invitation to Diane and Thomas the following Sunday, their reactions spoke volumes about their different personalities. Thomas accepted immediately, clearly relieved to avoid the logistical challenges of hosting in their small apartment. Diane, however, seemed conflicted. Thanksgiving is a lot of work, she said carefully. Are you sure you want to take that on? We're looking forward to it, I assured her. I've always enjoyed hosting. She nodded slowly. What can I bring? Just yourselves, Mark said firmly. Emily and I have the menu covered. I saw her hands clench briefly before she relaxed them with visible effort. Perhaps I could make my cranberry relish? It's Thomas's favorite. It was a small request, a way for her to maintain some tradition amid the changes. That would be lovely, I conceded, recognizing her need to contribute. As we drove home, Mark chuckled. Did you see her face when I said we had the menu covered? I thought she might spontaneously combust. She controlled herself admirably, I pointed out. The old Diane would have presented us with a detailed meal plan the next day, complete with shopping lists and cooking schedules. Progress, Mark agreed. Painful, grudging progress. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were busy with preparation. I deep-cleaned the house, ordered a fresh turkey from the local butcher, and planned a menu that incorporated traditions from both our families. Mark handled the guest list, inviting not only his parents and my brother's family, but also a couple of friends who had no local relatives to celebrate with. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I received an unexpected call from Thomas. Emily? I hope I'm not interrupting anything, he began hesitantly. I wanted to ask a favor. Of course, what? Do you need? I replied, curious about what would prompt my typically self-sufficient father-in-law to reach out directly. "It's about Diane's watercolor class," he explained. "They're having a small exhibition tomorrow evening at the community center." Student: "Work, nothing fancy. But she's quite nervous about it, though she'd never admit it." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for my mother-in-law. "Is her painting being displayed?" "Two of them, actually." The instructor selected her autumn landscape for a featured spot. Pride warmed his voice. "The thing is, she's convinced no one will come." Her specific words were, "Who would care about an old woman's hobby?" I thought it might mean something if you and Mark attended. The request touched me. 6 months ago, I would have suspected an elaborate manipulation, a ploy to command our attention and disrupt our plans. Now, I heard only a husband's concern for his wife's fragile self-esteem. "We'll be there," I promised. "What time does it start?" The community center was modestly decorated for the exhibition, with student watercolors displayed on portable panels arranged throughout the main hall. We found Thomas near the refreshment table, looking uncomfortable in a tweed jacket that had seen better days. "Thank you for coming," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Diane's over by her paintings. She doesn't know I called you." We spotted her across the room, dressed more formally than her usual attire, hands clasped tightly before her as an elderly gentleman commented on her work. She looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way I'd never associated with the domineering woman who had terrorized my home. Mark approached first, touching her elbow gently. "Mom, these are fantastic." Diane turned, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mark? Emily? What are you doing here?" "We came to see your work," I explained, gesturing to the paintings. "Thomas mentioned the exhibition." She shot her husband a look that mixed irritation with gratitude. "You didn't have to come. I know you're busy with Thanksgiving preparations." "We wanted to be here," Mark assured her, studying the larger of her two paintings. A fall landscape with vivid oranges and reds reflecting in a still pond. "You've been hiding your talent all these years." Diane flushed with pleasure despite her attempt to appear nonchalant. "It's just a hobby." "A meaningful I observed, noting the care evident in each brushstroke. "You should be proud." We spent the next hour touring the exhibition, listening as Diane explained techniques and challenges, gradually relaxing into genuine enthusiasm for her rediscovered passion. When her instructor approached to compliment her work, introducing her to another student as one of our most promising new artists, I saw tears briefly shine in her eyes before she blinked them away. As we prepared to leave, Diane pulled me aside while Mark chatted with Thomas. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. It meant a great deal." "Your work is beautiful," I told her honestly. "I'm glad you're painting again." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what you said, about creating rather than controlling. It's different, expressing myself through art instead of imposing my will on everyone around me." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. My therapist would be so proud of that insight. The moment of genuine connection, brief as it was, stayed with me through the following day's Thanksgiving preparations. As I chopped vegetables and prepared stuffing, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. From territorial battles and legal threats to art exhibitions and holiday gatherings, the transformation seemed almost unbelievable. Thanksgiving morning dawned bright and clear. I rose early, putting the turkey in the oven before most of the household was awake. Mark joined me in the kitchen an hour later, coffee in hand. "Happy Thanksgiving," he murmured, kissing my temple. "Need help with anything?" "You can set the dining room table," I suggested. "The good china, I think." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Mom might interpret that as a competition." I smiled, remembering Diane's comments about my cheap linens. Or she might see it as an honor, us using our best things to welcome her. Optimist, he teased, but headed for the china cabinet. My brother Ryan and his wife Chloe arrived mid-morning, bringing homemade pies and welcome reinforcements for the kitchen. Chloe, a professional caterer, took over vegetable preparation with efficient skill, while Ryan and Mark handled the heavier lifting, moving furniture to accommodate extra seating, bringing up folding chairs from the basement. So the infamous in-laws are coming, Ryan remarked as they worked. Are you sure that's wise? Mark's expression was thoughtful. They're different now, or trying to be, at least. It's been interesting to watch. People don't change that fundamentally, my brother argued skeptically. Maybe not completely, Mark conceded, but they can make better choices, develop better habits. My mother's been doing that. It's not perfect, but it's progress. When the doorbell rang at precisely 1 o'clock, I felt a flutter of anxiety despite my confidence in our preparations. Old habits die hard, and my body remembered the stress of previous encounters with Diane, even as my mind embraced the possibility of change. Mark opened the door to his parents, who stood awkwardly on the porch, Diane clutching a crystal dish of cranberry relish, Thomas holding a small bouquet of flowers. Welcome, Mark greeted them warmly. Come in out of the cold. They entered, cautiously, as if stepping into unfamiliar territory rather than a house where they'd lived for months. I approached from the kitchen, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Happy Thanksgiving, I said, accepting the flowers from Thomas. These are lovely, thank you. The apartment has a shared garden, he explained. The last chrysanthemums of the season. Diane held out her cranberry dish. I made it with less sugar than usual. I remember you mentioned once that you prefer things less sweet. The considerate adjustment to her recipe, a small thing, but so unlike the Diane who had dismissed my preferences at every turn, caught me by surprise. That's perfect. Thank you for remembering. The early moments were awkward, with conversation flowing in fits and starts. Diane seemed determined to be on her best behavior, complimenting the table setting, asking polite questions about my brother and his wife, perching on the edge of the sofa as if afraid to fully occupy the space. Your home looks beautiful, she offered during a lull. You've done some redecorating since we were here last. I nodded, acknowledging the delicate reference to their previous occupation. Just a few updates for the season. The throw pillows are new. They complement the sofa perfectly, she said, smoothing her skirt. You have a good eye for color. From anyone else, the comment would have been unremarkable. From Diane, who had once criticized every decorative choice I made, it was nothing short of revolutionary. The arrival of our remaining guests, Jessica and her new boyfriend, plus Mark's colleague David, who was separated from his family by distance, eased the atmosphere. With more people to engage with, the conversation flowed more naturally, and by the time we gathered around the table, much of the initial tension had dissipated. I'd arranged the seating carefully, placing Diane between Thomas and David, away from me but not isolated at the far end of the table. Mark sat at one end, I at the other, a physical reminder of our united front as hosts. Before we eat, Mark announced, raising his glass, I'd like to propose a toast to family, given and chosen, to new beginnings and second chances, and to Emily, who made this beautiful meal possible. To Emily, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Diane met, my eyes across the table, her expression complex, gratitude mixed with something that might have been regret. To new beginnings, she added softly. The meal progressed smoothly, the food drawing appreciative comments, the conversation flowing easily among the diverse group. I watched Diane throughout, noting how she deliberately held back, allowing others to speak, resisting what must have been a powerful urge to dominate the gathering. Your cranberry relish is delicious, Diane, Chloe commented, Would you share the recipe? Diane brightened at the request. Of course. It's an old family recipe, but I'm always happy to pass it along. Mom's quite the accomplished cook, Mark added. She taught me everything I know about baking. Not that you ever practice, Diane teased gently. When was the last time you made those chocolate chip cookies you loved as a boy? The easy banter between them, mother and son finding a new equilibrium, warmed my heart. This was what I'd hoped for when I suggested hosting Thanksgiving. Not perfect harmony, but a step toward healing, toward redefining our family dynamics in healthier ways. After dinner, as the guests migrated to the living room for coffee and dessert, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Diane, who had insisted on helping clear the table despite my protests. You created a wonderful celebration, she said as she rinsed plates and handed them to me to load in the dishwasher. Everyone felt welcome. That's a gift. Thank you, I replied, touched by her sincerity. It means a lot to hear you say that. She paused, her hands stilling in the soapy water. I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately, about why I behaved the way I did when we lived here, why I felt so threatened by you. I held my breath, waiting for Diane to continue. She dried her hands slowly on a kitchen towel, gathering her thoughts. When Thomas and I lost our home, she finally said, I lost more than just a building. I lost my identity, my purpose, my control. For decades, that house was my domain. I knew every corner, chose every fixture, arranged every room exactly how I wanted it. She folded the towel with precise movements. Then suddenly it was gone, and we were here, in your space, where nothing was mine to control. I leaned against the counter, recognizing the courage it took for her to speak so candidly. That must have been difficult. It was, she admitted, but that doesn't excuse how I behaved. My therapist says I've spent my whole life defining myself through external validation, being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, creating the perfect home. When those things were threatened, I lashed out. You tried to reclaim control, I suggested, understanding dawning. By taking over our house. She nodded, looking ashamed. It was easier than facing how empty I felt inside, how little I knew about who I was beyond those roles. The vulnerability in her confession disarmed me. For the first time, I saw not just Diane, the controlling mother-in-law, but a woman struggling with her own demons, her own sense of displacement and loss. The painting helps, she continued. It's something that's just mine, something I can create rather than control. I'm glad you found that outlet, I said sincerely. And for what it's worth, I think you're more than the roles you've played. You're also an artist, a friend to the people in your community, a woman rediscovering herself. Tears welled in her eyes, surprising us both. She blinked them away quickly. You're very kind, especially considering everything I put you through. We're family, I said simply. Complicated, imperfect family, but family nonetheless. Mark appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face when he saw his mother's emotional state. Everything okay in here? Diane composed herself with visible effort. Just having a heart-to-heart with your wife. She's quite remarkable, you know. Mark smiled, wrapping an arm around my waist. I'm well aware. The moment of connection might have been awkward under different circumstances, but there was a genuineness to it that transcended our complicated history. As we rejoined the guests for dessert, I caught Thomas watching his wife with something like wonder as she engaged Chloe in a conversation about watercolor techniques. She seems different, he murmured when I brought him a slice of pumpkin pie. Lighter, somehow. Change suits her, I observed. He nodded thoughtfully. I should have encouraged her to pursue her painting years ago. But she was always so busy with Mark, with the house, with the committees and charity work. And I took the path of least resistance. It's not too late, I pointed out. For either of you. Thomas squeezed my hand gratefully. Thank you, Emily, for giving us another chance, for hosting today, for helping Diane find herself again. She did the hard work, I demurred. I just set some boundaries. Sometimes boundaries are exactly what we need, he replied with quiet wisdom. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Diane approached me with an unexpected request. Emily, I was wondering, the community center is hosting a holiday craft fair next month. I've been invited to display some of my paintings, maybe sell a few. Would you consider coming? Your opinion means a great deal. The invitation touched me. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined Diane Wilson seeking my approval or valuing my opinion. I'd be honored, I told her. Just let me know when. After all our guests had departed and the house was quiet once more, Mark and I collapsed on the sofa, physically exhausted but emotionally buoyed by the day's success. That went better than I could have imagined, Mark admitted, loosening his tie. No passive-aggressive comments, no territorial disputes, no tears. Well, except for that moment in the kitchen. What were you and Mom talking about? I shared the essence of our conversation, Mark's expression growing more thoughtful as I relayed Diane's insights about her controlling behavior. She never spoke that openly with me, he marveled, always had to maintain the perfect mother facade. She's discovering who she is beyond being your mother, I explained. It's probably easier to be vulnerable with me than with you. She doesn't have decades of established patterns to overcome. Mark pulled me closer. Well, whatever the reason, I'm grateful. Seeing her like this, more authentic, less controlling, it's like getting to know a new version of my mother. One I might actually enjoy spending time with. Don't get too comfortable, I warned playfully. She's still Diane. There will be backsliding moments when the old patterns resurface. I know, he acknowledged. But now we know it's possible. For her to change, to grow. That makes all the difference. I rested my head on his shoulder, reflecting on how far we'd all come from those fraught days of territorial battles and property deed revelations. The journey wasn't over, family healing never is, but the path forward seemed clearer, more hopeful than I could have imagined during those dark times. Winter arrived with a vengeance the following week, bringing ice storms and power outages across Mapleton. Our neighborhood was particularly hard hit, with tree limbs crashing onto power lines and roads becoming treacherously slick. Mark and I were fortunate. Our house had a gas fireplace that provided warmth despite the electrical outage, and we'd stocked up on essentials before the worst of the weather hit. On the second evening without power, Mark received a concerning call from Thomas. The heat's out at Silvercrest, he reported after hanging up. The backup generators are only powering emergency lighting and elevators. Most residents are gathering in the community room where they've set up temporary heaters, but it's getting quite cold. Concern flickered across my mind. They can't stay there if there's no heat. The temperature's supposed to drop below freezing tonight. Mark nodded grimly. Dad mentioned that some residents are being picked up by family members. We both knew where this was heading, even before he voiced the question. Would it be all right if they stayed here until their power's restored? Just for a night or 2 at most. 6 months ago, this request would have filled me with dread, triggering memories of their extended, temporary stay. But circumstances had changed. We'd all changed. Of course they should stay here, I said without hesitation. It's dangerously cold out there. Call them back and tell them to pack an overnight bag. I'll make up the guest room. Relief and gratitude washed over Mark's face. Thank you. I'll go pick them up right now. Their car's blocked in by fallen branches. As Mark bundled up and headed out into the storm, I prepared the guest room, putting fresh sheets on the bed and setting out extra blankets. I found myself arranging things with extra care, wanting them to feel comfortable without feeling like they were reclaiming territory. This visit was different, an emergency, not an invasion. And they were different too. When Mark returned with his parents an hour later, they looked cold, tired, and noticeably uncomfortable about imposing. Diane clutched a small overnight bag, her expression caught between gratitude and anxiety. "I'm so sorry about this," she began as she stepped inside, snowflakes melting on her coat. "We wouldn't have asked if there were any other option." "Don't apologize," I insisted, taking their coats. "It's freezing out there. Of course you should be somewhere warm." Thomas's normally ruddy complexion was pale with cold. "Half the complex, eh? Is without heat. They're talking about evacuating the most vulnerable residents to a shelter if it's not fixed by morning." "Well, you won't be going to any shelter," Mark assured him, guiding them toward the fireplace. "You'll stay here as long as necessary." I brought them hot tea, noticing how Diane perched tentatively on the edge of the sofa, careful not to spread out or make herself too comfortable. The contrast with her previous behavior couldn't have been more stark. "We've made up the guest room for you," I told them. "It should be cozy enough with the extra blankets. The house is staying reasonably warm with the fireplace, but let us know if you need anything else." "This is very kind," Thomas said, his hands wrapped gratefully around the steaming mug. Diane nodded agreement. "We'll try not to be in your way." Her statement, so contrary to her previous attitude of entitled occupation, brought a smile to my face. "You're not in our way. You're family seeking shelter during an emergency. There's a difference." We spent the evening gathered around the fireplace, playing board games by candlelight and sharing stories. Without electricity to power televisions or charge phones, we were forced into genuine conversation. It was surprisingly pleasant, unmarred by the tension that had characterized our previous cohabitation. When Diane and Thomas retired to the guest room around 10, Mark pulled me into a tight hug. "Thank you for this," he whispered, "for making them welcome without reservation." "It's what decent people do," I replied. "Besides, they're different. Now, you can see it in how they carry themselves, how they interact with us and each other." "I know," he agreed. "It's almost strange seeing Mom so careful, so conscious of boundaries." We slept soundly despite the howling wind outside, and I woke the next morning to the scent of coffee brewing. I found Diane in the kitchen, having figured out how to use our French press without electricity. "I hope you don't mind," she said, when she saw me. "Thomas and I are early risers, and I thought coffee might be welcome." "Mind?" "I'm grateful," I replied, accepting the mug she offered. "I'm useless before caffeine." She smiled tentatively. "I remember, from when we lived here. Before, the acknowledgement of our shared history, the good and the bad, hung in the air between us. Not exactly comfortable, but not hostile either. Progress. I want you to know," she continued, her eyes fixed on her coffee mug, "that I'm very aware of the difference between this visit and the last time we stayed here. I understand that this is temporary, a genuine emergency, and that you've been incredibly generous to welcome us." "I appreciate that," I said simply, "and I hope you know that in a true emergency, you can always turn to us. Family supports each other when it matters." Her eyes met mine, a flicker of surprise giving way to understanding. "Yes, when it matters. Not when it's convenient or serves one's own purposes." "Exactly," I agreed, touched by her insight. The power remained out for 2 more days, during which time Diane and Thomas proved to be considerate guests. They helped with meal preparation, kept their belongings confined to the guest room, and made a point of giving Mark and me privacy each evening. When word finally came that electricity had been restored at Silvercrest, they packed their bags without being asked, clearly intent on honoring the temporary nature of the arrangement. "You're welcome to stay for dinner before you go," I offered as Mark prepared to drive them home. "It's no trouble." "That's very kind," Thomas replied, "but we've imposed enough. Besides, we should check on our apartment, make sure nothing was damaged during the outage." Diane nodded agreement. Perhaps we could have you over for dinner. Next weekend instead? I've been practicing a new recipe I'd like to share. The invitation, natural, without agenda or manipulation, felt like another small victory. We'd like that, I accepted, exchanging a smile with Mark. As they prepared to leave, Diane surprised me with a brief hug. Thank you, Emily. For everything. The simple gesture and heartfelt words meant more than elaborate apologies or grand gestures ever could. We had turned a corner in our relationship, moving from adversaries to something approaching friendship. The winter months passed with a new rhythm to our family interactions. Sunday dinners alternated between our house and Diane and Thomas's apartment. Occasionally we met at restaurants, neutral territory where everyone seemed more relaxed. Diane continued her watercolor classes, displaying growing confidence in her artistic abilities. Thomas joined a book club at the local library, developing interests separate from his wife for perhaps the first time in their marriage. Mark and I continued our own therapy, individually and as a couple, working through the patterns that had contributed to our near-marital disaster. He became more assertive about his needs and boundaries, not just with his mother, but in all aspects of his life. I learned to voice concerns earlier rather than silently accommodating until resentment built to a breaking point. When spring arrived, bringing the anniversary of the property deed revelation that had started our family reckoning, Mark suggested a significant gesture. I've been thinking, he said one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching the first fireflies of the season. It's been almost a year since everything happened with the house and my parents. A year of enormous change, I agreed, sipping my wine. I was wondering, would you be open to adding my name to the property deed now? Not because I feel entitled to it, he added quickly, but as a symbol of our partnership, of how far we've come in rebuilding trust. The request surprised me. In the aftermath of the conflict, neither of us had mentioned the deed that had sparked such turmoil. I'd almost forgotten that the house remained solely in my name. Are you sure? I asked. After everything that happened, I wouldn't blame you if you preferred to keep it in my name. A sort of insurance policy. Mark shook his head. I don't want insurance policies between us, Em. I want partnership. Equal commitment, equal responsibility. He reached for my hand. But only if you're comfortable with it. I understand if you're not ready. I considered his request, searching my feelings for any hesitation or doubt. Finding none, I squeezed his hand. I think it's time. Let's call the lawyer next week and make it happen. His smile was radiant. Really? You're sure? I'm sure about us, I answered truthfully. About our marriage, our future. The deed is just a piece of paper. It's the trust behind it that matters. We scheduled the appointment, and 2 weeks later found ourselves sitting in Mr. Harris's office, signing the paperwork that would formally add Mark's name to our property deed. As the lawyer explained the legalities, I felt a profound sense of rightness about the decision. This wasn't surrendering control or security. It was embracing our partnership with renewed commitment. Should we tell your parents? I asked, as we left the office. About adding your name to the deed? Mark considered the question. Maybe in passing. Not as a big announcement. That might stir up old feelings better left undisturbed. But I don't want to hide it either. The opportunity arose naturally the following Sunday when we hosted Diane and Thomas for dinner. As we finished dessert, Thomas mentioned a neighbor at Silvercrest who was battling with their adult children over property ownership. Inheritance disputes can tear families apart, he observed. We've been fortunate to avoid that. Speaking of property matters, Mark said casually, Emily and I finalized some paperwork this week. My name is now officially on our house deed. I watched Diane carefully, curious how she would react to news that might once have triggered controlling behavior. She paused, fork halfway to her mouth, then set it down deliberately. That's wonderful, she said after a moment. It's important for couples to have clear legal standing on their shared assets. No passive-aggressive comments. No veiled references to the past conflict. No attempts to insert herself into our financial decisions. Just simple acknowledgement and support. Thomas raised his water glass in a small toast to shared assets and clear boundaries. We all clinked glasses, the moment significant not for what was said, but for what wasn't. The deed that had once been a flashpoint for family drama was now just an administrative detail, properly contextualized in the broader landscape of our lives. Later that evening, after Diane and Thomas had gone home, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table, a comfortable silence between us as we lingered over the last of our wine. "That went well," I observed. "Your mother's reaction to the deed news. A year ago, it would have triggered a 3-day silent treatment at minimum." "She's come a long way," Mark agreed. "We all have." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they hadn't moved in with us? If we hadn't been forced to confront all those dysfunctional patterns?" Mark contemplated the question. "We might have continued in the same unhealthy cycle indefinitely. Me trying to please everyone and failing, you silently accommodating until you couldn't anymore. My mother controlling from a distance." He shook his head. "Sometimes a crisis is necessary for growth. A painful but effective catalyst," I mused. "Would you change it? If you could go back and prevent them from moving in?" I considered the hypothetical carefully. No, I decided. As difficult as it was, it brought us here. To a stronger marriage, to better boundaries with your parents, to more honest communication all around. I wouldn't trade that growth, even to avoid the pain we went through. Mark reached across the table, taking my hand in his. Me neither, though I might have spared us a few of the more dramatic confrontations. I laughed, remembering the property deed revelation, the legal threats, the ultimatums. Where would the story be without a little drama? "Speaking of stories," Mark said, his expression turning mischievous. "Did I tell you Mom's watercolor instructor encouraged her to illustrate children's books? Apparently her style is perfect for it." Diane Wilson, children's book illustrator, I pondered, imagining my once fearsome mother-in-law channeling her creativity into stories for kids. I can actually see that working for her. "She's looking into community college courses on digital illustration," Mark added. "Dad says she's completely absorbed in researching the children's publishing industry." "Good for her," I said sincerely. "Finding purpose beyond family roles is important for everyone." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "That's what ultimately changed, isn't it? She found identity and meaning outside of controlling her family. I found the courage to set boundaries while still showing love. You learned to stand firm in your needs without rejecting connection. And your father discovered his voice after decades of silent enabling," I added. "A family transformation," Mark summarized. "All because my mother kicked you out of your own house." "And didn't realize I owned the property deed," I finished with a smile. Life takes unexpected turns. We raised our glasses in a final toast. To unexpected turns, to hard-won wisdom, to the house that had become both battleground and sanctuary on our journey toward authenticity and peace. Summer arrived with its own rhythms and rituals. Mark and I spent weekends tending to our garden, hosting barbecues for friends, and occasionally helping Diane and Thomas with projects around their apartment. What once would have felt like obligation now felt like normal family give and take, unburdened by resentment or power struggles. In July, we vacationed at a lakeside cabin a few hours north of Mapleton, just the two of us, a deliberate choice, to celebrate our strengthened marriage. On our third night there, as we sat on the dock watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, Mark broached a subject we'd been circling for months. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, his voice carrying across the still lake, "about what's next for us." I leaned against his shoulder, content in the moment. "What kind of next are you envisioning?" "The expanding kind," he replied, a note of cautious hope in his voice. I know we put family planning on hold when everything happened with my parents. But I've been wondering lately if you might be ready to revisit that conversation. The question settled between us, weighted with significance. Children had always been part of our long-term plan, but the chaos of the previous year had pushed those discussions to the background. Now, with our marriage on solid ground and family dynamics healthier than ever before, the timing felt right to consider the next chapter. I have been thinking about it too, I admitted. Watching you with your parents these past months, setting boundaries while still offering support, being firm but kind, it's shown me what kind of father you'll be. A good one, I hope, he said softly. The best, I assured him, turning to meet his gaze. You've learned from both your parents' mistakes and their strengths. You know what healthy love looks like now. Hope brightened his expression. So you're open to the idea of starting a family? I nodded, my heart expanding with certainty. More than open. I'm ready whenever you are. He pulled me close, his joy palpable in the gentle evening air. What about your concerns about Diane? About her potentially overstepping with grandchildren, the way she did with our house? It was a fair question, one I'd pondered extensively during our family's transformation. I think she'll be excited, maybe a bit overenthusiastic at times, I acknowledged. But she's learned to respect boundaries, and more importantly, we've learned to establish and maintain them. You're right, Mark agreed. We're not the same people we were a year ago. Neither is she. Besides, I added with a smile, your mother's illustration career seems to be taking off. Between her classes, her commission work, and that children's book proposal she's developing, she'll have less time and energy for meddling. Mark laughed, the sound echoing across the lake. Who would have thought that watercolor painting would be the key to family harmony? Creative fulfillment is powerful medicine, I observed. For all of us. We spent the rest of the evening discussing practical considerations, timing, finances, how our lives would change with the addition of a child. As darkness fell and stars scattered across the sky, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this peaceful moment of planning and possibility. When we returned from vacation, life resumed its pleasant rhythm. I threw myself into a challenging new marketing project at work, while Mark received a promotion that came with increased responsibility and travel. Diane's first illustrated children's book dummy was accepted by a small regional publisher, sending her into a flurry of creative activity that left little time for family intrusion. Thomas joined a senior hiking club, developing a passion for outdoor photography that complemented his wife's artistic endeavors. In September, on a crisp autumn morning reminiscent of the day Diane and Thomas had first arrived with their suitcases, I stood in our bathroom staring at a positive pregnancy test. Emotions flooded through me, joy, nervousness, and a deep certainty that despite all our family's complicated history, this child would be welcomed into a circle of love that had been tested, broken, and painstakingly rebuilt into something stronger and more authentic than before. When I shared the news with Mark that evening, his happiness was tempered with thoughtful consideration. How do you want to tell my parents? He asked, his hand resting protectively over mine. And when? I considered the question carefully. Let's wait until the 3-month mark, when we tell everyone else. No special treatment, no early announcements, just a normal family dinner where we share our news. He nodded, understanding my reasoning. Equal footing, no implied hierarchy of importance. Exactly. Your parents will be grandparents, important figures in our child's life, but not central, not in charge. They'll understand, Mark said, confidently. Mom especially, she's been working so hard on respecting boundaries. 3 months later, as December dusted Mapleton with the first snow of the season, we invited Diane and Thomas to Sunday dinner, along with my brother Ryan and his wife. The evening progressed pleasantly through appetizers and main course, conversation flowing easily among the diverse personalities gathered around our table. As dessert was served, an apple crisp with vanilla ice cream, Mark caught my eye from across the table. I nodded, a silent confirmation that the moment had arrived. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. Before we dig into dessert, Emily and I have some news we'd like to share. He reached for my hand, his smile radiant. We're expecting a baby, due in May. The table erupted in excited congratulations. Ryan immediately rose to hug me, while Chloe peppered us with questions about how I was feeling and whether we knew the gender yet. Through the commotion, I watched Diane, curious how she would react to news that would fundamentally shift our family dynamics once again. Her eyes filled with tears, but her smile was genuine as she looked from Mark to me. "A baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "How wonderful." Thomas beamed beside her, his hand covering hers on the table. "Congratulations to you, both. This is tremendous news." When the initial excitement subsided, Diane approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "May I?" she asked, gesturing vaguely toward my still flat stomach. The request was tentative, respectful of my personal space in a way that would have been unimaginable 18 months earlier. I nodded, and she placed a gentle hand where her grandchild grew. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine with unexpected vulnerability. "Not just for this moment, but for everything. For loving my son. For giving our family another chance when you had every reason not to." The simple acknowledgement, free from manipulation or hidden agenda, touched me deeply. Family is worth fighting for, I told her, even when it's complicated. "Especially then," she agreed, with a wisdom born of hard lessons. As the evening continued, I observed Diane's behavior with the practiced eye of someone who had weathered her controlling tendencies firsthand. She offered congratulations without dominating the conversation. She asked questions about our plans, without imposing her own opinions. When Chloe mentioned baby showers, Diane suggested her community center as a possible venue, but quickly added, "Only if that appeals to you, of course. It's entirely your decision." These small acts of restraint and respect might have gone unnoticed by others, but to me, they represented monumental growth. The woman who had once tried to claim my house as her territory was now carefully navigating the boundaries around this new chapter of our lives. Later, as we said our goodbyes at the front door, Diane surprised me with one final gesture. Pressing a small package into my hands, she said, "Just a little something. Open it when you have a moment." After everyone had left and Mark was loading the dishwasher, I unwrapped the package to find a small watercolor painting in a simple frame. It depicted a family of birds, 2 larger ones and a tiny nestling, perched in a sturdy tree. The brushwork was delicate, the colors warm and inviting. A note card tucked behind the frame read, "For your growing family. May your home always be a place of love, respect, and belonging. With gratitude for second chances, Diane." I traced the image with my fingertip, moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. The Diane who had once tried to erase me from my own home had created this beautiful representation of family, one that acknowledged my place, respected our boundaries, and celebrated our future. Mark appeared beside me, drying his hands on a dish towel. "What's that?" Wordlessly, I showed him the painting and note. He studied them for a long moment, emotion playing across his features. "She really has changed, hasn't she?" "We all have," I replied, resting a hand on my stomach, where new life grew. For the better. That night, as I hung Diane's painting in what would become the nursery, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this point. From territorial battles over property deeds to preparing for a new generation, our family had traversed a landscape of conflict, revelation, and healing that had transformed us individually and collectively. The house that had once been a battleground now stood as testimony to resilience and growth, a place where boundaries were respected, where honest communication replaced manipulation, where imperfect people continued to learn and evolve together. As I stepped back to admire the painting in its new home, I felt a profound sense of peace. The property deed that had sparked such turmoil now seemed like a distant memory, important for what it had revealed and catalyzed, but no longer defining. Our family story, that story continued to unfold, chapter by chapter, challenge by challenge, love by precious love. And I was grateful for every word of it, even the difficult ones that had brought us to this place of hard-won harmony. The seasons turned. Spring, blossoms gave way to summer heat, and before we knew it, I was 8 months pregnant and putting final touches on the nursery. Life had fallen into a comfortable rhythm that still sometimes surprised me when I stopped to reflect on how far we'd come. Mark and I had completed our pre-baby to-do list methodically. Childbirth classes, pediatrician selection, nursery preparation, and the challenging task of establishing clear grandparent boundaries before our little one arrived. That last item proved easier than anticipated. Diane had continued her remarkable transformation, channeling her controlling tendencies into her burgeoning illustration career rather than our lives. Her first children's book was scheduled for publication in the fall, an achievement that filled her with purpose and pride. Thomas beamed whenever he mentioned her work, clearly delighted by his wife's late-blooming artistic success. "Have you thought about a baby shower?" Jessica asked one Saturday as she helped me organize tiny clothes in the nursery dresser. "It's getting close to your due date." I folded a mint green onesie, smoothing the soft fabric. "Actually, Diane offered to host one at their community center. Small, just close friends and family." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "And you agreed? Voluntarily?" "Surprised me too," I admitted with a laugh. "But she's been so respectful, asked what theme I preferred, showed me invitation options, checked which weekend worked best. No taking over, no imposing her vision." "Miracles never cease," Jessica marveled, sorting tiny socks into a drawer. "What did Mark think?" "He's cautiously optimistic. Says if it goes well, it's another positive step in their grandparent journey." I rubbed my swollen belly as the baby delivered a particularly energetic kick. "If not, we have contingency plans." Jessica nodded approvingly. "Boundaries with escape hatches. I've taught you well." The shower took place the following weekend. A sunny afternoon that bathed the community center in golden light. Diane had decorated with tasteful yellow and mint accents, colors I'd mentioned preferring over traditional pink or blue, and arranged a tempting spread of finger foods prepared by Chloe's catering company. About 20 guests mingled in the upbeat, pleasant space, admiring the handmade banner Thomas had surprisingly crafted himself. "This is lovely," I told Diane honestly, taking in the thoughtful details. "Thank you for putting it together." She beamed, clearly pleased by my approval, but working to contain her enthusiasm within appropriate bounds. "I'm glad you like it. I wanted it to reflect your taste, not mine." The simple acknowledgement that my preferences mattered, that this celebration was about my journey into motherhood rather than her journey into grandmotherhood, spoke volumes about how far she'd come. As guests played silly shower games and I unwrapped gifts, I caught Diane watching me with an expression of quiet joy tinged with something like wistfulness. Later, as the party wound down, she approached with a rectangular package wrapped in silver paper. "One more gift," she said softly. "May I?" I nodded, curious. Inside the package lay a leather-bound baby book, clearly expensive and beautifully crafted. But what caught my breath was the first page, where Diane had painted a delicate family tree with our names, Mark's and mine, as the trunk, with branches extending upward for future children and roots below for grandparents on both sides. "It's a family legacy book," she explained. "For recording milestones, memories, traditions. Every family should have one." I traced the careful brushwork, noting how she'd given equal prominence to my parents and Mark's in the root system. No. Hierarchy. No implied ownership or dominance. Just family. Connected but distinct. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely touched. I thought perhaps... She hesitated, then pressed on. Perhaps we could work on it together sometimes. You would be in charge, of course, but I could help record memories, add illustrations. Only if you wanted. The invitation represented everything she'd learned, offering assistance without assuming control, suggesting collaboration without demanding involvement, respecting my authority as the mother while acknowledging her role as grandmother. I'd like that, I told her, meaning it. As Mark and I drove home that evening, the car filled with baby gifts and leftovers, he reached over to squeeze my hand at a stoplight. You doing okay? That was a lot of social energy for someone in your condition. I'm tired but happy, I assured him. Your mother did an amazing job with the shower. Thoughtful without being overbearing. She's been reading those grandparenting books I bought her, Mark revealed with a smile. The ones about respecting boundaries and supporting without interfering. Dad says she's highlighting and taking notes like she's studying for a final exam. The mental image made me laugh. Diane approaching grandmotherhood with the same determined focus she'd once applied to controlling our household. At least she's redirecting that energy positively. She wants to get it right this time, Mark said more seriously. To be the kind of grandmother our child enjoys being around, not one they have to recover from later in therapy. I rested, my hand on my rounded belly, feeling our baby shift beneath my palm. Self-awareness is a powerful thing. 2 weeks later, I went into labor 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Mark was away at a conference in Chicago, unreachable during a keynote address when my water broke as I was working from home. After several frantic failed attempts to reach him, I called Jessica, only to get her voicemail. She was in court all day on a major case. Fighting rising panic as contractions intensified, I scrolled through my contacts, landing on Diane's name. I hesitated only briefly before calling. She answered on the second ring. Emily? Is everything all right? My water broke, I managed, between controlled breaths. Mark's at his conference and Jessica isn't answering. I need someone to drive me to the hospital. I'm on my way, she said immediately, her voice calm and decisive. 10 minutes, 15 at most. Do you have your hospital bag ready? By the front door, I confirmed, grateful for her practical response. Good. Try to time your contractions while you wait. I'll be there as quickly as I can. True to her word, Diane arrived 12 minutes later, effortlessly taking charge of the situation without overstepping. She helped me to her car, placed my hospital bag in the trunk, and drove with careful efficiency, neither speeding dangerously, nor dawdling at yellow lights. Have you reached Mark? She asked as we neared the hospital. I nodded, breathing through another contraction. Finally got a text through. He's booking the first flight back but won't make it for hours. Thomas is contacting the airline about emergency family priority, she informed me. He has connections from his business travel days. The thoughtful assistance without takeover continued at the hospital. Diane helped me check in, ensured my birth plan was noted by the staff, then settled into a corner chair in my delivery room, present but unobtrusive. Would you prefer I wait outside? She offered as a nurse examined me. I don't want to intrude. The consideration in her offer, so different from the Diane who had once rearranged my kitchen without permission, touched me deeply. Please. Stay, I said, surprising us both. At least until Mark arrives. She nodded, moving her chair closer when I reached for her hand during a particularly intense contraction. You're doing wonderfully, she encouraged. Just breathe through it, like in your classes. For the next 4 hours, Diane proved to be exactly the support person I needed. Calm, encouraging, advocating for my preferences with medical staff, without speaking over me, offering water and back pressure without hovering. When the decision for an epidural arose, she supported without influencing, holding my hand through the procedure without a single in-my-day comment about natural childbirth. Mark arrived, breathless and disheveled, just as I reached the transition phase of labor. He rushed to my side, pressing his lips to my forehead. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here. Thank God Mom was with you." Diane rose from her chair, gathering her purse. "I'll wait outside now." "Actually," I said, reaching for her hand, "would you stay? Both of you?" The surprise and emotion that flickered across her face spoke volumes. She glanced at Mark, who nodded encouragement. "I'd be honored," she said quietly, resuming her position on my other side. 2 hours later, our daughter entered the world with a powerful cry that filled the delivery room. The doctor placed her on my chest, and I gazed, in wonder at her perfect tiny features, overwhelmed by a love so intense it nearly stopped my breath. "She's beautiful," Mark whispered, tears streaming down his face as he touched her downy head. Across the bed, Diane stood with her hands pressed to her mouth, eyes shining with contained emotion. I recognized the restraint in her posture, the conscious effort to witness without inserting herself into this intimate family moment. "Would you like to hold your granddaughter?" I offered when the nurses had completed their initial assessments. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the swaddled bundle. "Hello, precious girl," she murmured, gazing down at the newborn with unabashed adoration. "I'm your grandmother." She looked up at me, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Emily, for including me in this moment." That night, after Diane and Thomas had gone home and Mark dozed in the recliner beside my hospital bed, I watched our daughter sleeping in the bassinet and reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this point. The property deed conflict that had seemed so catastrophic at the time had ultimately been the catalyst for deeper understanding, healthier boundaries, and genuine family healing. In the months that followed, Diane continued to surprise us with her commitment to being a supportive grandmother without overstepping. She asked permission before visiting, never showed up unannounced, and offered help without assuming control. When she babysat, she followed our instructions meticulously. When she had suggestions, she phrased them as gentle questions rather than directives. "She's like a completely different person," I remarked to Mark one evening as we watched her, reading to our daughter, her illustrator's sensibilities evident in how she engaged the baby with the book's pictures. "Not different," Mark corrected thoughtfully. "More authentic, maybe, less driven by fear and control." As our daughter grew from newborn to infant to toddler, Diane found her proper place in our family ecosystem. Important, but not central. Influential, but not controlling. Loving, but respectful of boundaries. She doted on her granddaughter without undermining our parenting, celebrated milestones without claiming credit, and navigated the complex terrain of modern grandparenting with remarkable grace. Thomas thrived in his grandfather role, teaching our daughter to identify backyard birds and taking endless photographs of her adventures. Together, he and Diane created a warm, stable grandparent presence that enriched our daughter's life without complicating ours. On our daughter's second birthday, we hosted a small celebration in our backyard. As family and close friends gathered around for cake, I found myself standing beside Diane, watching Mark help our toddler blow out her candles. "I've been meaning to tell you," Diane said quietly. "Thomas and I are considering a move." I turned to her in surprise. "A move? Is everything all right at Silvercrest?" "Everything's fine," she assured me. "But I've been offered an artist residency at a children's book publisher in Portland. 3 months initially, with potential for permanent illustration work afterward." "Diane, that's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "Your career is really taking off." She nodded, a blend of pride and uncertainty in her expression. "It's an amazing opportunity, but Portland is 3 hours away. We wouldn't see you all as often." I heard the unspoken question in her tone. Would this distance damage the relationship we'd all worked so hard to build? Would she lose her connection? To her granddaughter? 3 hours isn't so far, I pointed out gently. We could visit for weekends, and there's video calling for bedtime stories. You wouldn't mind? Us moving farther away? The question revealed how profoundly our relationship had evolved. The Diane who had once tried to take over my house now sought reassurance that physical distance wouldn't sever our family bonds. I think you should pursue your dreams, I told her honestly. Your granddaughter will be proud to know her grandmother is a successful illustrator, and the connection you've built with her is strong enough to withstand some geographic distance. Relief softened her features. Thank you, Emily, for understanding, for everything, really. As guests gathered for a group photo, I reflected on the extraordinary journey our family had traveled. The crisis that had begun with property deeds and territorial disputes had ultimately forged stronger, healthier relationships built on authenticity, rather than obligation. We had all found our proper places in the family constellation, connected but distinct, supportive without suffocating, loving without controlling. 6 months later, we traveled to Portland for the launch of Diane's first major children's book as lead illustrator. The local bookstore was filled with admirers as she read from the colorful pages. Our daughter perched on Mark's shoulders to see her grandmother in the spotlight. Gamma draw, she announced proudly to anyone who would listen, pointing to Diane, at the signing table. Later, at dinner in Diane and Thomas's new apartment overlooking a tree-lined Portland street, I presented them with a special gift, a framed document that had once been the source of so much conflict. Our property deed, Mark questioned, confused as his parents unwrapped it. The original, yes, I confirmed. I had our lawyer draw up a new one when we added your name last year. This one is just a memento now. Diane's fingers traced the paper that had once represented threat and loss to her. Why give this to us? Because it marks the beginning of our real family story, I explained. Not the wedding or the house purchase or even our daughter's birth, but the moment when everything fell apart and we had to decide whether to rebuild something better from the pieces. Thomas nodded, understanding. The breaking point that became a turning point. Exactly, I agreed. We could have let that conflict destroy our family. Instead, it transformed us. Diane wiped a tear from her cheek. I was so afraid of losing my place in Mark's life that I nearly guaranteed exactly that outcome. If you hadn't stood your ground, Emily, if we all hadn't done the hard work afterward, I corrected gently. Standing my ground was just the beginning. What matters is how we all chose to grow. As the evening continued, I watched my daughter play happily with the grandparents who had learned to love without possessing, to support without controlling, to belong without dominating. The property deed that had once symbolized ownership and territory now represented something far more valuable, the foundation upon which we had built a family defined by respect, authenticity, and love. Later that night, in our hotel room, Mark pulled me close as we drifted toward sleep. That was a beautiful gesture, he murmured against my hair. Giving them the deed. It felt right, I replied. That chapter of our story is complete. The deed served its purpose. Did you ever imagine, back when everything was falling apart, that we'd end up here? With my mother pursuing an art career in Portland, my father taking nature photography classes, and us stronger than ever. I considered his question, thinking back to those dark days of conflict and ultimatums. No, I admitted. I was just trying to reclaim my home, my marriage. I couldn't see the bigger possibilities then. Life takes unexpected turns, Mark observed sleepily. The best ones usually do, I agreed, thinking of the winding path that had brought us to this place of hard-won peace and authentic connection. As Mark's breathing deepened into sleep, I reflected on the irony that had defined our family's journey. The property deed that Diane hadn't known existed had initially threatened to tear us apart, only to ultimately become the catalyst for profound healing and growth. Sometimes the very thing we fear losing most, control, territory, influence, is precisely what we need to surrender in order to gain what truly matters. Our home was no longer a battleground but a sanctuary. Our family relationships no longer defined by obligation but by choice. The deed that had once represented mere ownership now symbolized something far more precious, the foundation of authentic love built upon respect for each person's autonomy and dignity. In the gentle darkness of the hotel room, with my husband sleeping beside me and our daughter peaceful in her travel crib, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had brought us to this place of genuine connection. The crisis that had begun with property and possession had transformed into a story of growth and grace, proof that sometimes losing what we cling to most desperately is the very thing that sets us free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.